Somewhere in your house right now, or somewhere in the shop you'll walk into this week, there's a chocolate egg. It's wrapped in foil. It's sitting in a box next to a stuffed rabbit. And if there are children in your life, they'll tear the foil off on Sunday morning and eat it without thinking, the way you did, the way your parents did. But let me ask you something. Once you hear it, you'll never be able to unhear. What does an egg have to do with a man dying on a cross? What does a rabbit have to do with the crucifixion? What does chocolate have to do with the sealed tomb? What connects the most violent executions in Roman history to pastel colors and an egg hunt in the garden? I'll tell you what connects them. Over 1,000 years of buried history, a pagan god who died and came back to life every spring, centuries before Jesus was born. A blood sacrifice in Egypt that involved painting a doorpost with the dead lamb's blood so the angel of death would skip your house. A Roman torture device that was engineered to keep you alive and suffering for as long as physically possible. And a company in Birmingham that figured out how to make a hollow chocolate egg in 1875. Every single element of Easter, every egg, every bunny, every hot cross bun, every lamb on the table, every cross on the wall has something underneath it. Something that was there first. Something that was absorbed, repainted, and given a new name. Tonight, I'm going to dig it all up. But before we continue, the Midnight Archives exist for one reason, and that's to find the stories they buried, the ones too dark to be told during the day. They buried this one for a reason, and now we're going to dig it up. If that's what you're here for, hit subscribe and like this video, and I'll keep the candle lit. Now, let's find out what's really inside the egg. Welcome to the Midnight Archives. Chapter 1. The God Who Died Every Spring. 1,000 years before the tomb in Jerusalem, there was another God. He was young, he was beautiful, he died violently every year, and every year he came back. His name was Attis, and his story will sound familiar. He is born in Phrygia, a kingdom in what is now central Turkey, in a story that is strange from the first sentence. His mother is Nana, a river nymph. She becomes pregnant not by a man, but by an almond, or, in some versions, a pomegranate, that falls from a tree that has grown from the severed body of a hermaphroditic deity named Attis. The mythology is deliberately disorienting. Attis arrives in the world through a chain of events that no human logic can follow, because he is not meant to be understood. He is meant to be felt. He is a force, the force that makes things grow, the force that turns winter into spring, the force that pushes green shoots through frozen soil. He grows into a young man of extraordinary beauty. The goddess Cybele, the great mother, one of the most powerful deities in the ancient Mediterranean, falls in love with him. Cybele is not a gentle goddess. She is the earth itself, vast, ancient, ferocious. She is worshipped with drums and cymbals and ecstatic dancing. Her priests are the Galli, men who, in the frenzy of initiation, castrate themselves with sharpened stones and offer the severed flesh to the goddess. Cybele is not a deity you approach casually. She consumes, she wants Attis, she demands his devotion, and for a time, he gives it. They are beautiful together, the young god and the ancient goddess, the mortal spring and the immortal earth. But Attis is young, and young things move. They turn toward whatever light catches their eye. They wander. In some versions of the story, he falls in love with a human woman, a princess, a nymph, someone whose beauty is smaller than Cybele's, but closer, warmer, more his size. In others, he simply strays, pulled by the gravity of his own restlessness towards something that is not the goddess. The specific object of his attention doesn't matter. What matters is that he turns away, and Cybele feels it. The Great Mother does not grieve the way mortals grieve. She does not weep into her pillow, or write letters she doesn't send. She is the earth. When she is wounded, the wound is geological, seismic. The anger of Cybele is not an emotion, it is an event. She drives Attis mad. The madness comes suddenly. One moment he is himself, the beautiful young god, clear-eyed, alive. The next, something has entered him, a frenzy, a derangement so total that the person who existed before it is simply gone, replaced by a creature that runs and screams and tears at its own body. The ancient sources describe it as possession, not by a spirit, but by grief itself, by the goddess's pain translated into his nervous system, her heartbreak made physical in his flesh. He runs, through the forests of Phrygia, through the underbrush, the branches tearing at him. He is screaming, or he is silent, the accounts vary. He reaches a pine tree, he collapses beneath it, and in the frenzy, in the absolute annihilating madness that has consumed everything he was, he takes a sharp stone, and he castrates himself. The act has a logic, even inside the madness. The part of him that strayed, the part that desired someone other than the goddess, the organ of the betrayal itself, is the part he destroys. The body that turned away from Cybele is punished by the body. The infidelity is answered with the removal of the capacity for infidelity. It is the most extreme act of penance imaginable, and in the mythology, it is also a surrender. Attis is giving himself back to the goddess in the only way that's left. He can't undo what he did. He can't return to her as the man he was, so he unmakes the man he was. He removes the thing that made him wander and offers it to the earth, to her. The blood runs into the soil. It soaks into the earth, into Cybele herself, because Cybele is the earth. Violets grow from the drops, small purple flowers pushing up through the dirt where the blood fell, the most delicate thing growing from the most violent act. The earth mourns. When Attis dies, the vegetation dies, the crops wither, the fields go dark, the world enters a period of grief, cold, barren, lifeless. The death of the god is the death of the land. His blood is in the soil, and the soil has stopped producing, and then he comes back. The details vary between sources. In some versions, Cybele herself resurrects him. In others, Zeus intervenes. In the version that the Romans adopted and celebrated in the streets of their capital for centuries, the resurrection is the climax of a week-long festival that builds from grief to frenzy to ecstasy. The Romans encountered the cult of Cybele and Attis in the 3rd century BC. They imported it, brought the sacred stone of Cybele from Phrygia to Rome in 204 BC during the Second Punic War, because an oracle told them it would help them defeat Hannibal. The stone was installed on the Palatine Hill, the cult became official, and by the imperial period, the death and resurrection of Attis was one of the most elaborate public festivals on the Roman calendar. It played out over a week, in late March, around the spring equinox. On the 15th of March, a group of reed-bearers, the Canophori, carry reeds in procession. The reeds represent the riverbank where the infant Attis was discovered. It is the beginning, the birth of the god. For 6 days the tension builds. Fasting, purification, the faithful abstaining from bread, from pork, from wine, from pomegranates. The deprivation is deliberate, the body is emptied, the spirit is prepared for what is coming. On the 22nd of March, a pine tree is cut down in the forest. The tree is Attis. His death is being reenacted. The tree is wrapped in linen, burial cloth, and decorated with violets, the flowers that grew from his blood. It is carried through the streets of Rome in a funeral procession. The drums beat, the cymbals crash. The mourning is public, loud, and real. The god is dead. The people grieve. The 23rd is a day of mourning. Fasting continues. The faithful weep. The tree, the body of the god, lies in the temple of Cybele. And then, the 24th, the dies sanguinis, the day of blood. The priests of Cybele, the Galli, work themselves into a frenzy. The drums accelerate, the cymbals grow louder. The Galli begin to cut themselves, slashing their arms with knives, spattering the altar and the pine tree with their own blood. The blood is an offering, a payment, the price of the god's return. And then the new initiates, caught in the ecstasy of the ceremony, the drums, the blood, the weeping, the smoke, the collective hysteria of hundreds of bodies pressing together in a temple, grieving a dead god. The new initiates do what Attis did. They castrate themselves, sharpen stones, pottery shards, in the middle of the temple, in front of the congregation, in a frenzy so absolute that pain has become irrelevant. The logic is the same logic that drove Attis under the pine tree, but transformed from penance into devotion. The Galli are not punishing themselves, they are becoming the god. They are reenacting his sacrifice in their own flesh. By doing what Attis did, they are joining him, stepping into his story, making his suffering their suffering, his surrender their surrender. The act is the ultimate offering to Cybele, the most intimate part of yourself, the thing that makes you what you are. You give it to the goddess, you give it permanently, you can never take it back, and in the giving you become something else, no longer fully male, no longer what the Roman world considers a man, but something in between, something that belongs entirely to Cybele, something sacred. The Roman writer Lucian described the scene. The initiates, he says, strip off their clothes and run through the streets carrying the severed flesh. They throw it through the doorway of whatever house they choose, and the household is obligated to provide them with women's clothing, which they will wear for the rest of their lives. The act is irrevocable. The offering is permanent. From this moment forward, the Gallus lives as neither man nor woman, a third thing, a sacred thing, a living reminder of what Attis gave under the pine tree. They have given their bodies to the goddess, and she has accepted. This is not metaphor. This is not sanitized mythology retold for a textbook. This is what happened in the streets of Rome, in public, every March, for centuries. The greatest empire in the world stopped its business to mourn a god who died under a pine tree and bled into the earth. And then, the 25th, the Hilaria, the day of joy. Attis has returned. The god is alive. The vegetation will grow. The fields will produce. The light has defeated the dark. The morning explodes into celebration. The fasting ends. The faithful feast. They put on disguises. They play tricks on each other. They mock their neighbors, impersonate magistrates, invert the social order. The release, after days of compressed grief, after the blood, after the frenzy, is physical, visceral, overwhelming. The city shakes with it, a god who dies violently, a period of mourning and fasting, blood, sacrifice, a body wrapped in burial cloth, and then resurrection, the return of joy, the return of life, the world transformed from death to life in a single morning. At the spring equinox, centuries before Christ, the parallels are there. The script doesn't need to draw them for you. You can hear them. What matters for the story of Easter is what happened next. When Christianity spread through the Roman Empire in the 1st, 2nd, and 3rd centuries AD, it encountered the cult of Attis everywhere. The spring equinox was already sacred. The death and resurrection narrative was already embedded in the culture. The emotional arc, grief, mourning, fasting, then the explosion of joy when the god returns, was already the rhythm that millions of people associated with this time of year. The early church fathers noticed the resemblance. They were alarmed by it. The 2nd century Christian writer Justin Martyr addressed it directly. He argued that the similarities between Attis and Christ were the work of the devil, who had planted counterfeit versions of the true story in pagan culture to confuse the faithful. The devil, Justin claimed, had seeded the world with false dying and rising gods specifically to make the real one harder to recognize when he arrived. It's a remarkable argument. The similarity was so obvious that the church's best defense was to say the devil did it. The church didn't destroy the Attis festival. It couldn't. The emotional infrastructure was too deeply embedded. Instead, over the course of several centuries, it placed the celebration of Christ's resurrection into the same calendar slot, over the same emotional arc, in the same season. The Council of Nicaea, in 325 AD, established the formula for calculating Easter's date, the first Sunday after the first full moon after the spring equinox. The formula locked Easter permanently into the window that the Attis festival and dozens of other spring equinox celebrations across the ancient world had occupied for millennia. The pine tree wrapped in linen was replaced by the cross. The day of blood became Good Friday. The Hilaria became Easter Sunday. The God who dies and rises at the equinox was given a new name. And in English and German, the holiday kept a different old name entirely. Easter, Ostern. The Venerable Bede, the 8th century English monk, wrote that the Anglo-Saxons called April Eosturmonath, the month of a goddess named Eostre, a spring goddess, a dawn goddess, a goddess whose festival had been replaced by the Christian celebration. One monk, one paragraph, no other source mentions her. She is either real and buried or she never existed, but her name survived, attached to a Christian holiday, carried forward through the centuries by the English language, a ghost in the word you say every April without knowing you might be naming a goddess. The equinox, the dying god, the goddess, the morning, the blood, the resurrection, the joy, all of it was there before the tomb in Jerusalem. All of it was absorbed. And the symbols that survived the absorption, the specific physical objects that sit on your table every Easter, each one has its own buried history, and each one is stranger than the last. Chapter 2. The things on the table. The egg, the bunny, the lamb, the hot cross bun. 4 objects, 4 buried histories, and none of them are what you were told in Sunday school. The egg. An egg is a sealed container. Inside it, something that appears to be dead, still, cold, inert, showing no sign of life. And then the shell cracks. Something alive comes out. Something that wasn't there, or that you couldn't see, emerges from inside a sealed tomb of calcium and membrane. Eggs have been symbols of rebirth for as long as humans have been using symbols. In ancient Persia, painted eggs were exchanged at Nowruz, the spring New Year festival that is still celebrated today, over 3,000 years after it began. In Rome, eggs were offered at household shrines in spring. In cultures across the ancient world, the egg meant life from apparent death, the beginning inside the ending. The reason eggs became specifically associated with Easter is more practical than mystical. During the 40 days of Lent, Christians were forbidden from eating eggs, but chickens don't observe Lent. They kept laying. By Easter Sunday, 6 weeks of eggs had accumulated, hard-boiled to preserve them, decorated to distinguish them from fresh ones, and given as gifts on the morning the fast ended. The Easter egg began a surplus inventory, but underneath the practical explanation, the older symbolism was waiting. A sealed space, something apparently dead inside. The shell breaks, the stone rolls away. The egg could mean both things at once, the Lenten surplus and the pagan resurrection, and because it could mean both, it was allowed to survive. The hare. Rabbits don't lay eggs. The combination of a rabbit delivering eggs makes no biological sense. It makes supernatural sense. The hare, not the rabbit, the hare, a wilder and stranger animal, was sacred across pre-Christian Northern Europe. If Bede's goddess Eostre existed, the hare was her creature. It was associated with the moon, with fertility, with the boundary between the tame and the wild. In Celtic folklore, the hare is a shapeshifter. Witches take its form. There is an old Scottish folktale about a farmer who shoots a hare that has been stealing milk from his cows. He hits it in the hind leg. He follows the blood trail to a cottage. Inside, he finds an old woman sitting by the fire with a fresh wound on her leg. The hare and the woman are the same creature. During the witch trials of the 16th and 17th centuries, testimony after testimony describes women transforming into hares, running through fields in the moonlight, crossing boundaries that humans cannot cross. A hare that sits and watches you, that appears where hares shouldn't be, that won't run when you approach. That hare is probably not a hare. In Ireland, there was a prohibition against eating hare, not because the meat was bad, because you might be eating a woman. The hare was a creature of the threshold, dawn and dusk, the liminal hours, the in-between times when the world is neither one thing nor the other. It was a fertility symbol. Hares breed visibly and prolifically in spring. The phrase mad as a March hare comes from their mating behavior, boxing, leaping, chasing each other in behavior so frenzied it looks like possession. German Lutherans in the 1600s told their children about Osterhase, the Easter hare, who laid colored eggs for good children. German immigrants brought the tradition to America in the 1700s. The candy industry did the rest. The shapeshifter became a chocolate mascot. The witch's disguise became a stuffed toy. The threshold creature was domesticated, defanged, and placed in a basket. The lamb. To understand the Easter lamb, you have to go back to Egypt, not the Egypt of pyramids and pharaohs, the Egypt of the book of Exodus, the Egypt of slavery and plagues, and the night that gave Passover its name. The Israelites are enslaved. God sends Moses. Pharaoh refuses to release them. 10 plagues descend, water turning to blood, frogs, lice, flies, livestock disease, boils, hail, locusts, 3 days of darkness, so total the Egyptians cannot see their own hands. And then the 10th, the worst. The angel of death will pass through Egypt tonight. Every firstborn child in the land will die. Every house, every family. God gives the Israelites a single instruction. Take a lamb, a year-old male, without blemish. Slaughter it at twilight. Take the blood, still warm, still bright, and paint it on the doorposts and the lintel of your house, the top of the frame and the 2 sides. The blood must be visible. It must be unmistakable. When the angel passes through tonight, it will see the blood and pass over. The families do as they are told. At twilight, across the land of Goshen where the Israelites live, the lambs are slaughtered. The blood is caught in basins. Fathers dip bundles of hyssop, a plant with absorbent leaves, into the basins and paint the doorframes. The smell of the blood mixes with the smell of the roasting meat. They eat the lamb that night, standing up, dressed for travel, sandals on their feet, staffs in their hands. They eat quickly. They eat as people eat when they know something is coming, and they don't want to be caught sitting down when it arrives. Midnight. The angel passes through. In the houses marked with blood, silence. The angel sees the blood and moves on. The children sleep. The parents stand in the dark, listening, holding their breath, hearing nothing except the beating of their own hearts. In the houses without blood, a sound begins. It starts low, a single cry from a single house, then another, then another. The sound spreads across Egypt like a wave, rolling outward from the center of the city to the edges, from the palace to the slums, from the great estates to the servants' quarters. Every house, every family, the firstborn is dead, the Pharaoh's son is dead, the prisoner's son is dead, the maidservant's son is dead. There is, the book of Exodus says, not a house where someone is not dead. The screaming rises across Egypt in the dark, and in the houses with the lamb's blood on the doorpost, silence. The lamb dies so the children live. The blood on the doorpost is the price of survival. Christianity reframed the Passover lamb entirely. Jesus became the Lamb of God. John the Baptist, seeing Jesus approach in the Gospel of John, says, "Behold, the Lamb of God, who takes away the sin of the world." Paul writes to the Corinthians, "Christ our Passover lamb has been sacrificed." The death on the cross was understood as the final Passover, the blood that protects not one household, but the entire world. The sacrifice that ends all sacrifice. The lamb on your Easter table is a descendant of the one whose blood was painted on the doorpost in the dark. The knife that carved it is an echo of the blade at twilight. The meal is a memorial of a night when a lamb died so that children didn't. The hot cross bun, a sweet spiced bread roll with a cross on top, eaten on Good Friday. The cross seems obvious, the crucifixion, but cross-marked bread is older than Christianity. The ancient Greeks baked small cakes marked with a cross representing the 4 quarters of the moon. The Saxons baked bread with crosses to honor the spring goddess. When Christianity arrived, the cross on the bread was reinterpreted. Same bread, same mark, new meaning. In 1592, Elizabeth I attempted to ban the sale of hot cross buns, restricting the sale of spiced breads to funerals, Christmas, and Good Friday. The reason? The buns were surrounded by superstitions the church couldn't control. People believed a bun baked on Good Friday would never go mouldy, that grating it into water could cure illness, that hanging one from a kitchen rafter would protect the house from fire, that a sailor who carried one would never be shipwrecked. The ban didn't work. People kept baking them. The bread was older than the law. The superstitions were older than the cross. 4 objects on your table. The egg, a pagan fertility symbol wearing a Christian meaning. The hare, a shapeshifter in a bunny costume. The lamb, a blood sacrifice, carved and served. The bun, a mooncake with a different cross. But there is one symbol of Easter we haven't touched, the one on every church wall, the one on every necklace. And the story of how that symbol ended up where it is starts not with the cross itself, but with the man they put on it. And to understand how he got there, you need to understand the most dangerous week in the most dangerous city in the ancient world. Chapter 3. The most dangerous week. Jerusalem, spring, approximately 30 AD. The city is packed with pilgrims, the Roman garrison is on high alert, and a man rides in on a donkey to the cheers of a crowd that is calling him a king. He has about 7 days to live, and each day brings him closer. Jerusalem, in the spring of approximately 30 AD, is a city on the edge. It is Passover week. The population, normally 40 to 50,000, has swollen to several times that number. Jewish pilgrims from across the Roman Empire flood through the gates to celebrate the festival at the temple, and the festival they are celebrating is the liberation of the Jewish people from a foreign empire. The Roman garrison, permanently stationed in the Antonia fortress overlooking the Temple Mount, has been reinforced. Extra soldiers, extra officers, the Roman prefect, Pontius Pilate, has come to Jerusalem personally from his base in Caesarea on the coast. He doesn't come because he enjoys the festival. He comes because Passover, every year, is the week most likely to produce a riot. The combination is volatile. Religious fervor, national memory, massive crowds, the visible presence of the occupying army, and the story the crowds are telling each other of God delivering his people from a foreign empire describes, with uncomfortable precision, the situation they are currently living in. This is the city Jesus enters. Sunday. He comes from the east, from the Mount of Olives, riding a donkey. The crowd lines the road. They wave palm branches, a symbol of Jewish sovereignty since the Maccabean revolt 2 centuries earlier. They throw their cloaks on the ground. They shout, "Hosanna! Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. Blessed is the coming kingdom of our father David." The kingdom of David, the last great Jewish king. The crowd is hailing Jesus as a king in a Roman province during the most politically dangerous week of the year. From Pilate's perspective, from the perspective of any Roman official watching from the walls of the Antonia fortress, this is not a religious procession. This is a political demonstration. Jesus enters the city. He goes to the temple. He looks around. Mark's gospel adds a detail the other gospels don't. He looks around at everything, but it is already late in the day. He doesn't act. He leaves. He goes back to Bethany, a village 2 miles east of Jerusalem, where he is staying. He has seen what he came to see, and he will be back tomorrow. Monday. Jesus returns to the temple. The temple in Jerusalem is not just a place of worship. It is the spiritual, economic, and political center of Jewish life, and in its outer courts, the court of the Gentiles, the largest open space in the complex, a market operates. Money changers sit at tables, converting foreign currency into the temple shekel, the only coin accepted for temple offerings. Merchants sell doves and lambs and other animals for sacrifice. The operation is authorized by the priesthood. It is profitable, and it is loud. The clinking of coins, the haggling of merchants, the bleating of animals, filling a space that is supposed to be sacred with the noise of commerce. Jesus walks into the court. He overturns the money changers' tables. Coins scatter across the stone floor. He drives the animal sellers out with a whip of cords. Cages open, doves fly. The merchants scramble for their money on their hands and knees. My house shall be called a house of prayer, he says, but you have made it a den of robbers. This is not a minor disruption. This is an assault on the economic infrastructure of the temple itself, the institution that employs the priesthood, manages the sacrificial system, and serves as the interface between the Jewish people and their God. The high priest, Caiaphas, and the Sanhedrin, the Jewish governing council, have tolerated Jesus' preaching in the countryside. A wandering teacher with a following is not unusual. Palestine is full of them. But this, overturning tables in the temple during Passover in front of thousands of pilgrims, one day after riding into the city like a king, is a direct challenge, in their house, during their festival, and it is a threat to the arrangement. The priesthood exists in a delicate balance with Rome. The Romans allow the Jews to worship, to maintain the temple, to govern their internal affairs. In return, the priesthood keeps the peace. If Jesus triggers an uprising, Rome will respond, and Rome's response to uprisings is not proportional. It is annihilating. The days between. For the next 2 days, Tuesday, Wednesday, Jesus teaches in the temple courts. He is there in public, in the open, surrounded by crowds who hang on his words. The Sanhedrin cannot arrest him during the day. The crowds are too large. The risk of a riot is too high. The very thing they are trying to prevent, an explosion of public anger that would bring the Roman legions down on all of them, would be triggered by a public arrest. Caiaphas makes his calculation. The Gospel of John preserves his reasoning. It is better for one man to die for the people than for the whole nation to perish. One man, for the nation. If this man continues, Rome will destroy everything. Better to hand over one life than to lose everything. The calculation is political, the kind of terrible pragmatic calculation that occupied people are forced to make in every era of history. The decision is made. Jesus will be arrested, but it has to happen at night, away from the crowds. They need someone who knows where he will be after dark. Judas Iscariot, one of the 12, one of the inner circle. Sometime during these days, the Gospels don't specify exactly when. Judas goes to the chief priests and offers to hand Jesus over. The Gospels don't agree on why. Matthew says money, 30 pieces of silver, the price the Sanhedrin pays. Luke and John say something darker. Satan entered into Judas. The amount, 30 pieces of silver, is loaded. In the book of Zechariah, 30 pieces of silver is the price of a slave. The deal is made. Judas will tell them where Jesus is. He will identify him. He will do it at night when the crowds are gone. All that remains is the night itself. Thursday, the upper room, a house in Jerusalem. The owner is unnamed, the location unspecified. Jesus gathers his 12 followers for the Passover meal, the lamb, the unleavened bread, the bitter herbs, the wine, the meal that every Jewish family is eating tonight, the meal that commemorates the night in Egypt when the angel of death passed over the houses marked with blood. During the meal, Jesus does something that none of them expect. He takes the bread, he breaks it. This is my body, he says, which is given for you. He takes the cup of wine. This cup is the new covenant in my blood, which is poured out for you. The Passover meal commemorates the blood of the lamb on the doorpost, the sacrifice that saved the firstborn. And now, at his own Passover meal, Jesus is rewriting the ritual. The bread is his body, the wine is his blood. He is the lamb. Then he tells them that one of them will betray him. The room goes cold. Surely not I, they say, one after another. Jesus dips a piece of bread and hands it to Judas. What you are going to do, he says, do quickly. Judas takes the bread. He leaves, into the night. The others don't understand. Some of them think Jesus is sending Judas to buy supplies for the festival. Some think he's telling Judas to give money to the poor. They don't realize what has just happened. The betrayer has just been given his cue, and he has walked out the door with it. Thursday night. After the meal, Jesus goes to a garden called Gethsemane. On the slope of the Mount of Olives, east of the city, across the Kidron Valley, he has come here before. It is a regular place of retreat, which is why Judas knows exactly where to send the arresting party. He takes Peter, James and John deeper into the garden. He tells them to sit and keep watch, and something happens that the Gospels describe with a rawness that is startling in texts otherwise restrained about their protagonist's emotions. He is afraid. He falls on his face. He prays. He asks God to take this away. Father, if it is possible, let this cup pass from me. Luke's Gospel says his sweat falls like drops of blood, a condition called hematidrosis, a physiological response to extreme distress, where capillaries near the sweat glands rupture. He is not serene. He is not composed. He is a man in a garden at night, on his knees, begging for a way out. There is no way out. Not my will, he says, but yours. He goes back to the disciples. They are asleep. Could you not keep watch for 1 hour? He asks Peter. The question is heartbreaking in its smallness, not a command, not a rebuke. Could you not stay awake for 1 hour? He goes back, prays again, the same words, the same silence in response. He returns to the disciples, asleep again. Mark's Gospel notes they did not know what to say to him. They can't stay awake, and they can't explain why. The body is shutting down in the face of a dread too large to bear. He prays a third time, comes back. They're asleep. He stands over them, 3 men on the ground, under olive trees, in the dark, and says, "Enough, the hour has come." He can see the torches, flickering through the olive trees, coming up the slope from the Kidron Valley, a line of fire moving through the dark. Judas walks up to him, kisses him on the cheek. The kiss is the signal. This is the one. Peter draws a sword, cuts off the ear of the high priest's servant, a man named Malchus, according to John's Gospel. Jesus tells him to stop. Put your sword away. Luke says he touches the servant's ear and heals it. The last miracle performed on the servant of the man who ordered his arrest. Then he lets them take him. The disciples run, every one of them, into the dark. The men who swore they would die before they abandoned him disappear into the olive trees in seconds. Mark's Gospel includes a strange, specific detail. A young man is there, wearing nothing but a linen cloth. The guards grab him. He slips out of the cloth and runs away naked into the night. Nobody knows who this young man is. Some scholars think it's Mark himself, a signature hidden in the text, the author placing himself in the scene as a witness. Friday before dawn, they bring Jesus to the house of Caiaphas. The Sanhedrin assembles, or at least a quorum of it. It is the middle of the night. The trial begins. Witnesses are brought. They testify that Jesus said he would destroy the temple and rebuild it in 3 days. The testimonies don't agree. Under Jewish law, which requires 2 matching witnesses, the case is failing. Caiaphas cuts through the procedure. He looks at Jesus. Are you the Messiah, the Son of the Blessed One? In Mark's Gospel, I am. Caiaphas tears his robes. Why do we need any more witnesses? But the Sanhedrin cannot execute. Only Rome can execute. Under the Roman occupation, the power of capital punishment belongs to the governor alone. If they want Jesus dead, they have to get the Romans to do it. Friday morning, at dawn they bring him to Pilate. Pilate doesn't care about blasphemy. Blasphemy is a Jewish religious matter. Rome doesn't interfere in religious disputes. What Pilate cares about is sedition. Are you the king of the Jews? Jesus answers with something that is either an admission or a deflection, depending on which gospel you read. You have said so, or, my kingdom is not of this world. Pilate finds no basis for a charge. He tries to release him. He offers the crowd a choice, a Passover custom, according to the Gospels, in which the governor releases one prisoner chosen by the people. He gives them Jesus and Barabbas, a man imprisoned for insurrection and murder. The crowd chooses Barabbas. What shall I do with Jesus? Pilate asks. Crucify him. Pilate washes his hands. I am innocent of this man's blood. The sentence is passed. Jesus is flogged. He is dressed in a purple robe, a mockery of royalty. A crown of thorns is pressed onto his head. The soldiers kneel. Hail, King of the Jews. They strike him, they spit on him, they give him the crossbeam, and they walk him through the streets of Jerusalem to a hill outside the city walls, a place called Golgotha, the place of the skull. Chapter 4. The Machine. The cross is the most recognized symbol on earth. 2 billion people worship under it. Before it meant any of those things, before hope, before salvation, before jewelry, it was a device, and the Romans who built it were trying to solve a very specific engineering problem. The problem was this: how do you kill a man as slowly as possible, in as much pain as possible, in front of as many people as possible? That is the design brief for crucifixion, not execution. Execution kills you. Crucifixion keeps you alive. The objective is duration. The objective is suffering. The objective is spectacle. The Romans who perfected this method over centuries wanted a technology that would keep a human body conscious and in agony for as long as the body could sustain it. Hours, sometimes days, in public, at a height where everyone could see, on a road where everyone would pass. It was an engineering problem, and they solved it. The victim is flogged first. The Roman flagrum, a short whip with multiple leather thongs, each tipped with fragments of bone or lead. The flogging is calibrated, enough to shred the skin, to produce massive blood loss, to weaken the victim into compliance, not enough to kill. The art is in the dosage. Too much, and the spectacle is over before it reaches the cross. The victim carries the crossbeam to the execution site. The patibulum, a rough timber weighing 75 to 125 pounds, placed across the shoulders. The vertical post is already in the ground. Execution sites are permanent fixtures positioned along major roads, outside city gates, at crossroads. You cannot enter or leave the city without seeing what happens to people who challenge Rome. The nailing. Iron nails, roughly 7 inches long, driven through the wrists, not the palms, which cannot support the body's weight. The nails pass between the small bones of the wrist, or through the gap between the radius and ulna, just above the wrist joint. The feet are nailed through the heel bones. The physical trauma is severe, but not fatal. The nails are structural. They hold the body in position. The killing is done by something else entirely. When the body hangs from outstretched arms, the weight of the torso pulls the chest cavity into a position where the lungs cannot fully expand. You can inhale, partially, shallowly, enough to survive for moments. You cannot exhale effectively. Carbon dioxide accumulates in the blood. The body screams for oxygen. The heart races. The muscles of the chest strain against the weight pulling them down. The only way to breathe is to push upward. Press down on the nail through the feet. Straighten the legs. Feel the iron grinding against the heel bone. Lift the body just enough to expand the chest. Breathe. 1 breath. 2. The strength gives out. The legs buckle. The body sags. The weight returns. The lungs compress. The suffocation begins again. Push up. Breathe. Sag. Suffocate. Push up. Breathe. Sag. Suffocate. This cycle is the mechanism of death. It can continue for hours. In documented cases, it continues for days. The victim doesn't die from any single wound. They die from the accumulation, the blood loss, the dehydration, the exposure, the shock, and above all, the exhaustion of a body forced to choose, over and over, between the agony of pushing up and the agony of drowning in the open air. Eventually the muscles fail. The body can no longer rise. The lungs can no longer fill. And the victim dies, not from the nails, not from the blood, but from the slow, grinding, mechanical impossibility of continuing to breathe. Some crosses include a small wooden peg, a narrow seat protruding from the upright. This is not mercy. This is an extension. The seat prevents the victim from dying too quickly. It gives the body just enough rest to prolong the cycle. A design refinement, a feature. When the Romans want a crucifixion to end faster, they break the victim's legs. Without legs, the victim cannot push up. Without pushing up, the lungs cannot fill. Death follows within minutes. The Gospel of John records this detail. The soldiers come to break the legs of the 3 men crucified on Friday. They break the legs of the first. They break the legs of the second. When they come to Jesus, he is already dead. They do not break his legs. A soldier drives a spear into his side. Blood and water flow out, consistent with what modern physicians describe as pleural and pericardial effusion, the accumulation of fluid around the lungs and heart that occurs in the final stages. After death, the body is left on the cross for days, for weeks, exposed to the sun, the rain, the birds. The Romans deny crucified prisoners proper burial, a punishment that extends beyond death. In the ancient world, burial is essential for the soul's passage. A body denied burial is a body denied rest in both worlds. In 71 BC, after the slave revolt led by Spartacus is crushed, the Roman general Crassus crucifies approximately 6,000 captured slaves along the Appian Way, the main road from Capua to Rome, one cross every 30 or so meters for 200 kilometers. 200 kilometers of dying men. You are a merchant. You are traveling from Capua to Rome, a journey of several days on foot. You set out in the morning. The road is good. The Appian Way is the finest road in the empire, paved with stone, wide enough for 2 carts to pass. It is the road that connects Rome to the south. It is the road everyone uses. And for the entire journey, the crosses line both sides. They are not spaced widely, one every 30 meters or so, close enough that you can see the face of the man on the next cross before you've passed the one in front of you, close enough that the sounds overlap, because the sound of a man trying to breathe on a cross is not a scream, it is a rasp, a wet, shallow, rhythmic gasping, the sound of lungs that cannot fill, of a body that is pushing itself upward and sagging back, pushing and sagging in a cycle that doesn't stop. The sound carries across open ground the way no other human sound does, and it doesn't stop. It continues, hour after hour, as you walk. Some of the men are in the early stages, still pushing up, still breathing, still conscious. Some are further along, their movements weaker, their breathing shallower, the intervals between the gasps growing longer. Some are no longer moving. The birds have found them. You walk for a day. The crosses continue. You walk for another day. The crosses continue. You sleep by the road, and in the morning the first thing you see is the crosses, and the first thing you hear is the sound. And you keep walking because the road goes to Rome, and there is no other road. 6,000 men, 200 kilometers. The message is not written on a sign. The message is the road itself. That is the cross. Before hope, before salvation, before the necklace. The man at the center of the Easter story. The man who was kissed by Judas in a garden, who was condemned by Pilate in the morning, who was mocked with a purple robe and a crown of thorns, dies on one of these machines. It is a Friday afternoon. The place is Golgotha, the place of the skull. 2 others are crucified with him, one on his left, one on his right. Above his head, a sign written in Hebrew, Latin, and Greek, so everyone can read it. The charge, Jesus of Nazareth, King of the Jews. The Gospels record that it takes approximately 6 hours, from roughly 9 in the morning to 3 in the afternoon. Mark's Gospel says darkness falls over the land at noon, 3 hours of darkness in the middle of the day. At 3 in the afternoon, Jesus cries out in Aramaic, Eloi, Eloi, lema sabachthani? My God, why have you forsaken me? And then he dies. Joseph of Arimathea, a wealthy member of the Sanhedrin who had not agreed with the decision to condemn Jesus, asks Pilate for the body. This is unusual. Crucified bodies are normally left to rot, but Pilate grants it. Joseph wraps the body in linen. He places it in a rock-cut tomb in a garden near the execution site. A large stone is rolled across the entrance. Friday evening. The tomb is sealed. The stone is in place. The body is inside. Saturday is silence. Chapter 5. The empty tomb. Saturday is the day nobody talks about, the day between the death and whatever came next, the day when nothing happened, and that nothing, that silence, that void, that complete absence of hope, is the hinge the entire story turns on. Peter is somewhere in Jerusalem, the same Peter who swore at the Last Supper that he would die before he abandoned Jesus, the same Peter who drew a sword in Gethsemane and cut off a man's ear, that Peter, in the courtyard of the high priest's house, in the hours after the arrest, was asked 3 times if he knew the man. A servant girl looks at him by the fire. "You were with the Galilean," she says. "I don't know what you're talking about." He moves to the gateway. Another girl sees him. "This fellow was with Jesus of Nazareth," she says to the people standing nearby. "I don't know the man." An hour passes. The people in the courtyard approach him. "Surely you are one of them," they say. "Your accent gives you away." Peter is from Galilee. His accent is different from the Jerusalem dialect. He can't hide it, and Peter begins to curse and swear. "I don't know the man." A rooster crows. Peter remembers. Jesus had told him at the supper only hours ago, "Before the rooster crows, you will deny me 3 times." Peter had said it was impossible. He had said he would die first. And now the rooster is crowing and the words are still in the air. And Peter is standing in a courtyard in Jerusalem, having sworn 3 times that he doesn't know the most important person in his life. Luke's gospel adds a detail that the others don't. At the moment the rooster crows, Luke says, "The Lord turned and looked straight at Peter." Jesus is inside the house, being interrogated, and at the moment of the 3rd denial, he turns and looks through a doorway or a window, and his eyes meet Peter's. Peter goes outside and weeps bitterly. That is where Peter is on Saturday, somewhere in the city, carrying the weight of those 3 denials, knowing that the last thing Jesus heard from his most devoted follower was a lie. The other disciples are scattered, in locked rooms, doors bolted. John may be with Jesus' mother, Mary. The Gospel of John says that Jesus, from the cross, entrusted his mother to John's care. The rest have fled. They are hiding. Saturday is the day that gets skipped in every Easter service, every Sunday school lesson, every telling of the story, but it might be the most human day in the entire narrative, the day of nothing, the day when the body is in the tomb and the stone is in place, and the world is exactly what it appears to be, a place where good men can be tortured to death by the state, and the sun comes up the next morning as if nothing happened. The disciples sit in those rooms, and they try to process the fact that the man they left everything to follow, their homes, their jobs, their families, has been tortured to death in the most public, most humiliating way available. He isn't just dead, he was executed as a criminal, between 2 thieves, on a hill where everyone could see. This is not the silence before a revelation. These people don't know what's coming. For them, this is the silence after an ending. The world made sense until Friday, now it doesn't, and there is no reason to believe it will ever make sense again. If the story ended here, Christianity would not exist. Jesus of Nazareth would be a footnote in the history of Roman-occupied Judea, one more failed Messiah, one more crucified rebel. The cross would still be a Roman torture device. The word Easter would mean nothing more than a month nobody remembers. Sunday morning, before dawn, the women go to the tomb. Mary Magdalene is named in all 4 Gospels. They carry spices, myrrh, and aloes to anoint the body. The burial on Friday was rushed. They are going to finish it. They are worried about the stone. Who will roll it away for us, they ask each other. A practical concern. The stone is large. They don't know how they're going to move it. The stone has been moved. What they find inside, what they are told inside, differs between Gospels. Mark describes a young man in a white robe. Matthew describes an angel and an earthquake. Luke describes 2 men in gleaming clothes. John has Mary Magdalene arrive alone and find the tomb simply empty. The accounts disagree on the details. They agree on the claim. The tomb is empty. The body is gone. He is not here. He has risen. Over the following days, the risen Jesus appears to his followers. The accounts are strange, vivid, and difficult to categorize. He appears to the women at the tomb. He appears to the disciples in a locked room, the doors shut, the bolts drawn, and he is suddenly there, in the middle of them. Peace be with you. He shows them his hands and his side. Thomas is not there. When the others tell him, he refuses to believe. Unless I see the nail marks in his hands and put my finger where the nails were, I will not believe. A week later, Jesus appears again. He looks at Thomas. Put your finger here. See my hands. Reach out your hand and put it into my side. Thomas says, My Lord and my God. Two of them are walking to a village called Emmaus, 7 miles from Jerusalem. Their names, according to Luke, are Cleopas and a companion who is never identified. They are walking away from the city, away from everything. A stranger falls into step beside them. He asks what they are talking about. They stop. Luke says they stood still, their faces downcast. Are you the only visitor to Jerusalem who does not know the things that have happened there in these days? Cleopas says. The stranger asks, What things? They tell him, everything. The prophet, the miracles, the arrest, the trial, the crucifixion. We had hoped that he was the one who was going to redeem Israel, Cleopas says. We had hoped. Past tense. The stranger listens, and then he begins to talk. He walks with them, 7 miles, roughly 2 to 3 hours on foot, and he explains the scriptures, Moses, the prophets. He traces the arc of their own tradition for them, and they listen, and the road becomes a conversation they won't understand until it's over. They reach Emmaus, late afternoon, the sun going down. The stranger makes as if to continue walking, past the village, into the evening. They say, Stay with us, it is nearly evening, the day is almost over. He stays. At the table, the stranger takes bread. He blesses it, he breaks it, he hands it to them, and in the breaking of the bread, the specific gesture they had watched at 100 meals, the same gesture from 3 nights ago in the upper room when the man they loved took bread and said, This is my body. They recognize him. It is Jesus, and the moment they recognize him, he vanishes. There. They're not there. The bread still warm in their hands, the broken pieces on the table, the chair empty. Were not our hearts burning within us, they say, while he talked with us on the road? They had walked with him for 7 miles. They had talked with him for hours. They had sat at a table with him, and they hadn't known. He appears on a beach. The disciples have gone back to fishing, returned to their old lives, as if it's over. They fish all night, catch nothing. At dawn, a man stands on the shore. Cast the net on the right side. They do. The net fills so many fish they can't haul it in. John recognizes him first. It is the Lord. Peter throws himself into the water and swims to shore. When they arrive, Jesus has a fire going, fish on the coals, bread beside it. Come and have breakfast, he says. Breakfast, on a beach, after everything. Something happens to these people. Whatever they experience, whatever they believe they experience, in the days after the crucifixion, it transforms them. The same people hiding in locked rooms are, within weeks, preaching publicly in Jerusalem. Peter, the man who couldn't admit to a servant girl that he knew Jesus, is standing in the streets declaring the resurrection to thousands. Most of them die for it. Peter is crucified upside down in Rome, according to tradition. James is beheaded. Andrew is crucified. Thomas is killed with a spear in India. They do not recant. They do not retract. Whatever happened in that tomb, whatever they saw or believed they saw in the weeks that followed, they carry it to their deaths. That is the hinge on which the entire story turns. The Friday death, the Saturday silence, the Sunday morning when the stone was rolled away and the tomb was empty, and a woman in a garden heard her name spoken by a voice she thought she would never hear again. The story that started with a god named Attis dying under a pine tree in Phrygia, with blood soaking into the earth and violets growing from the drops, that story now has a new chapter, the same emotional arc, the same season, death, mourning, silence, and then the return. But the Easter you celebrate, The one with chocolate eggs and pastel colours and a stuffed rabbit in a basket looks nothing like a tomb at dawn. The distance between that Sunday morning and a hollow chocolate egg is the last chapter of this story, and it is a story of specific people making specific decisions, decade by decade, century by century, to turn the darkest story in Christianity into the brightest holiday on the calendar. Chapter 6. How Death Became Chocolate. You've seen what's underneath: the dying God, the blood on the doorpost, the shapeshifter in the field, the machine on the hill. Now I want to show you the last transformation, the one that turned all of it into something you can buy in a shop. For most of its history, Easter was experienced as a relief. 40 days of Lent preceded it. No meat, no eggs, no dairy. For 6 weeks the Christian faithful lived in deliberate deprivation. Easter Sunday was the end of that. The first bite of meat after 6 weeks without it. The first egg. The first taste of butter. The joy of Easter for most of the people who celebrated it for most of history was physical. Your body had been deprived. Now your body was fed. The eggs that had accumulated during Lent, 6 weeks of laying, 6 weeks of surplus that couldn't be consumed, were hard-boiled, decorated, and given as gifts on Easter morning. For centuries that's what the Easter egg was: a hen's egg, painted with onion skins and beet juice, blessed by the priest, given to a child or a neighbour, a modest gift, a practical celebration. And then a Quaker family in Birmingham changed everything. In 1824, John Cadbury opened a shop in Bull Street, Birmingham, selling tea, coffee, and drinking chocolate. His sons, Richard and George, expanded the business. They were Quakers, part of a religious tradition that valued industry, sobriety, and social reform. They built a factory. They built a model village for their workers, Bourneville, with houses, gardens, schools, and no pubs. In 1875, Cadbury produced the first modern hollow chocolate Easter egg. The technique was simple: pour melted chocolate into a mould, rotate the mould so the chocolate coats the inside evenly, cool it until the shell hardens. The result is an egg-shaped shell, thin, hollow, using a fraction of the chocolate a solid egg requires. That fraction was the revolution. Less chocolate per egg meant lower cost. Lower cost meant higher margins. Higher margins meant more production. More production meant the Easter egg went from a luxury for the wealthy to a mass market product within a single generation. Cadbury invested in moulds, each year more elaborate, more decorated, more collectible. They invested in foil wrapping, bright colours that caught the eye on a shop shelf. They invested in boxes, in ribbons, in the presentation that turned a piece of chocolate into a gift. By 1900, the Cadbury Easter egg was a national institution in Britain. The decorated hen's egg, blessed by the priest, given hand to hand, it didn't disappear. It was simply overwhelmed. The factory egg was cheaper, brighter, sweeter, and available in quantities the village priest could never match. The bunny crossed the Atlantic around the same time. German immigrants had brought the Osterhase to America in the 1700s, a folk tradition known mainly in German-speaking communities, barely visible outside them. The American candy industry saw the opportunity. By the early 1900s, chocolate bunnies were being mass-produced. By mid-century, over 90 million were manufactured every year in the United States alone. The folk creature, the shapeshifter, the witch's disguise, the threshold animal became a product line. And then the numbers took over. Americans spend over $3 billion on Easter candy annually. Over 16 billion jelly beans are produced for Easter each year. The National Retail Federation estimates that total Easter spending in the United States, candy, food, clothing, gifts, decorations, exceeds $20 billion. Easter is the second largest candy-selling holiday after Halloween and the third largest retail holiday after Christmas and Valentine's Day. In 1933, Irving Berlin wrote Easter Parade. In 1948, MGM turned it into a musical starring Judy Garland and Fred Astaire. The association between Easter and new clothes, new hats, new dresses, new purchases became fixed in the popular imagination. The holiday that commemorated a man who owned nothing, whose only garments were gambled for at the foot of the cross by the soldiers who killed him, became an occasion to buy more. And now, every April, a machine in a factory pours liquid chocolate into a mold. The mold rotates, the chocolate cools, the shell hardens, the egg is wrapped in foil, placed in a box, and put on a shelf for a child to find on Sunday morning. Inside the egg, nothing. It's hollow. Outside the egg, over 3,000 years of gods who die and return, of blood painted on doorposts, of shape-shifting hairs and moon-marked bread, of a man on a Roman machine gasping for every breath, of a tomb found empty at dawn, of a stranger on a road who vanishes when you recognize him, all of it compressed into a shell of chocolate, wrapped in foil, sitting on a shelf, waiting for Sunday. That's Easter, a dying god in Phrygia whose priests bled on the altar, a Passover lamb whose blood kept the angel of death away, a man on a Roman torture device on a hill called the Palace of the Skull, a tomb found empty on Sunday morning, and a hollow chocolate egg manufactured in a factory in Birmingham in 1875 containing nothing inside. Next time you pick one up, you'll know what you're holding. If this changed the way you see Easter, subscribe to the Midnight Archives, where we illuminate the dark corners of history, the stories that live beneath the ones we tell ourselves. Until next time, keep the candle lit.